Hello, and thank you for being here. My name is Melissa Moffett, and I'm an education assistant in School District 6. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the shared traditional territories of the Kootenai, Secwepemc, and Syilx peoples. This acknowledgement is not a formality, it is a responsibility to learn, to listen, and to reflect on how we show up as educators in a system that has not always honored Indigenous identity, knowledge, or belonging. Because what we are seeing in our classrooms right now matters. So, before we begin, I want to ground us in what this work is truly asking for. We are seeking real partnership with local Indigenous communities, elders, and knowledge keepers. We are seeking support from SD6 to pilot this work in a meaningful way. We are asking for time and space because relational and land based learning cannot happen when it is rushed. And most importantly, we are seeking ongoing collaboration so this work remains guided by community. So, what I'd like to do now is walk you through how all of this comes together. We are losing students, not always physically, but emotionally, mentally, and relationally. We are seeing anxiety, disengagement, and disconnection. And in some cases, we are losing Indigenous youth in ways that are heartbreaking and preventable. This is not about ability, it is about belonging. In SD6, we live and learn on the shared territories of the Kootenai, Secwepemc, and Syilx peoples. For generations, learning in these communities was relational, land-based, and connected to identity. Learning wasn't separated into subjects, it was lived. And that way of learning was disrupted. To understand the present, we need to understand education's role in the past. In Canada, education was used as a tool of disconnection. Children were separated from land, language, family, and identity. And here in our region, St. Eugene's residential school directly impacted local communities. This history is not distance, it is still shaping students' experiences today. When we hear the words, every child matters, most of us recognize them. We see the orange shirts, we acknowledge September 30th, we take time to reflect. And that matters. It represents a shift, a willingness to no longer hide this history. But this moment also asks something deeper of us. Because for over a century, Indigenous children were removed from their families, their cultures, and their identities through a system that was designed to disconnect. So while every child matters is something we now recognize, it invites us to ask, what does this actually mean to live that truth in our classrooms today? The impacts of that system did not end when residential schools closed. They continue in identity, in mental health, and in belonging. This is why this work cannot stop at awareness, because when students feel disconnected, learning becomes survival. But when students feel seen and valued, everything changes. So when we say every child matters, it cannot just be something we acknowledge. It becomes something we are responsible for in how we teach, in how we build relationships, and in how we create spaces where students truly belong. And to understand how these impacts continue today, we need to look deeper. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls on educators to move beyond awareness into action. This means integrating Indigenous knowledge, building real relationships, and supporting identity and belonging. This work is not an addition to education, it is a responsibility. Today, Indigenous youth experience significantly higher rates of suicide compared to non Indigenous youth. In some communities, 5 to 6 times higher. And in our own region, we have experienced that very loss. These are not distant statistics, they are part of our shared reality as educators and as a community. So, how does this happen? Health is not just individual, it is shaped by systems. Colonial policies created disruption. Education systems reinforced one dominant worldview, and students experience that directly through their identity and their belonging. When one worldview becomes the standard, other ways of knowing are pushed aside. And when students don't see themselves reflected, they disconnect. But this is not the only way learning can exist. Indigenous approaches to education are holistic and relational. Learning happens through connection to people, to community, and to experience. And when learning is grounded in relationship, students develop that identity, belonging, and purpose. Land-based learning reconnects education to place. The land becomes teacher, classroom, and curriculum. And for many students, this is where learning becomes meaningful again. This is where the work becomes real, because transforming education doesn't begin with large-scale change. It begins in the everyday decisions we make as educators. It begins with small, intentional shifts. Instead of teaching about Indigenous perspectives, we begin learning with and through Indigenous voices, knowledge, and lived experience. Instead of isolating subjects into disconnected pieces, we create opportunities for students to learn through their land, through story and relationship. Instead of positioning ourselves as the sole holders of knowledge, we open space for shared learning, student voice, and multiple ways of knowing. And instead of focusing only on outcomes, we begin with relationship. Because when connection comes first, students feel safe, they feel seen, and they feel like they belong. And that is where learning begins. But meaningful change cannot happen in isolation. Meaningful Indigenous education must be built in partnership with community. It must be guided by the knowledge, experience, and leadership of elders and knowledge keepers, because they are carriers of history, culture, and ways of knowing that cannot be replicated through textbooks alone. These relationships are not one-time invitations. They are ongoing, reciprocal, and grounded in respect. And when community voices are centered, education becomes more authentic, more relevant, and more connected to lived experience. And with that relationship comes a responsibility. Engaging with Indigenous knowledge requires more than good intention. It requires responsibility. It asked us to approach this work with humility, to recognize that knowledge is not something to take, but something we are invited into through relationship. This includes following cultural protocols, seeking permission, and ensuring the community voices are honored. Without this, even well-intentioned efforts risk repeating pattern of appropriation and disconnection. So when we bring together relationship, respect, and responsibility, we begin to see a different way forward. The Learning Spirit Framework is a relational land-based approach designed to restore a sense of belonging and support student well-being. It centers connection to land, to identity, and to community. It integrates Indigenous and Western knowledge systems, creating a more balanced, inclusive learning environment. And rather than focusing only on academic outcomes, it prioritizes the development of the whole child. And for this to take root, it must be implemented with care. This work cannot be rushed or imposed. It must be built through relationship. This begins with consultation and authentic relationship building with local Indigenous communities. It continues through co-development, where educators and community partners work together to design meaningful learning experiences, and it grows through ongoing collaboration, ensuring that this work remains grounded, respectful, and sustainable. This phased approach ensures that change is not performative, but deeply rooted in connection and accountability. And when this kind of learning takes place, when students feel seen, valued, and grounded in who they are, their capacity to learn, connect, and grow expands. Education becomes a place of safety rather than survival, Students begin to engage, not because they have to, because learning feels meaningful. For Indigenous students, this means reconnection, pride, and voice. For all students, it means learning within a system that honors relationships, diversity, and humanity. Because when we restore belonging, we restore the learning spirit. And this brings us to the question. That question is, what will we do with this knowledge? This is not about adding more to education. It is about transforming it. For too long, Indigenous students have been asked to fit into systems that were never designed for them. Now, we carry the responsibility to change that, not through intention alone, but through action, through relationships, through listening, through learning. Because when we center belonging, we change lives. And when we do this work together, we begin to heal what education has broken. This is how we restore the learning spirit.